What you're about to hear is a tale so terrifying, so steeped in urban horror and supernatural malevolence, that it has haunted the streetcar lines and cobblestone streets of New Orleans for over a century. This is not merely a story of transit workers who encountered mechanical difficulties or fell victim to late-night crime. This is the documented account of 13 of the most experienced streetcar conductors in the Crescent City who volunteered to operate the inaugural run of the mysterious Midnight Line, and the complete disappearance that would forever change how the people of New Orleans understood the thin boundary between public transportation and passages to realms beyond human comprehension. This is the true story of the Midnight Line incident of 1898, where the last stop was not a destination on any earthly map, and where the fare was paid not in coins, but in souls. The year was 1898, and New Orleans was experiencing a transportation revolution that was transforming the very fabric of urban life. The introduction of electric streetcars had replaced the old mule-drawn omnibuses, creating a network of rail lines that connected every neighborhood of the sprawling city and allowed people to travel distances that would have been impossible just a few years earlier. The streetcar system had become the circulatory system of New Orleans, carrying workers to their jobs, shoppers to the markets, and families to entertainment and social gatherings throughout the city. The New Orleans Railway Company had grown to become one of the most important institutions in the city, employing hundreds of conductors, motormen, and maintenance workers who kept the streetcars running from dawn to midnight every day of the week. These transit workers were skilled professionals who took pride in their ability to navigate the complex network of tracks that crisscrossed the city, to manage the crowds of passengers who depended on their services, and to maintain the precise schedules that kept New Orleans moving. Among the most experienced and respected members of this workforce were the 13 conductors who would volunteer for the inaugural run of the Midnight Line on that fateful October evening in 1898. These men represented the cream of the streetcar profession, workers whose knowledge of the city's geography was encyclopedic and whose ability to handle any situation that might arise during their shifts had earned them the trust and admiration of both their supervisors and their passengers. Leading the group was Tommy Boudreau, a Cajun whose family had worked the waterfront before the streetcars came to New Orleans. Tommy's natural understanding of transportation logistics and his ability to remain calm under pressure had made him one of the most valued conductors in the company's employ. His friendly demeanor and quick wit had made him a favorite among regular passengers, who would often time their travel to ride on his car. Among the volunteers was Paddy O'Malley, an Irish immigrant whose family had fled the potato famine and found new opportunities in America through hard work in the transportation industry. Paddy's quick reflexes and natural mechanical aptitude had made him invaluable when streetcars experienced technical difficulties, and his knowledge of the electrical systems that powered the cars was considered among the best in the company. The group also included Samuel Washington, a former slave whose freedom had come with the end of the Civil War and whose real liberation had come through his mastery of the streetcar conductor's trade. Samuel's dignity, professionalism, and encyclopedic knowledge of New Orleans neighborhoods had earned him respect from passengers of all backgrounds, and his presence on any car was considered a guarantee of safe and efficient service. From the German community came Heinrich Müller, whose family had brought European precision and engineering knowledge to the New Orleans transit system. Heinrich's methodical approach to his work and his understanding of the complex scheduling that kept the streetcar system running smoothly had made him one of the company's most reliable employees. The remaining 9 conductors represented the multicultural nature of New Orleans' workforce: Creoles whose families had been part of the city's fabric for generations, Italians who had brought Mediterranean work ethics to American transportation, native-born Americans who had learned their trade through years of experience on the rails, and immigrants from various European countries who had found new lives in the streetcar industry. The Midnight Line itself was a mysterious addition to the New Orleans Railway Company's network, a route that had been planned and constructed in secret over several months in 1898. The line's tracks followed a path through parts of the city that were rarely visited by tourists or casual travelers, winding through the oldest neighborhoods of New Orleans and connecting locations that seemed to have been chosen for reasons that went beyond normal transportation logistics. The route began at the company's main depot in the central business district, but instead of following the established pattern of connecting residential neighborhoods to commercial areas, the Midnight Line curved through the French Quarter, past St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, through the Treme district, and into areas of the city that were associated with voodoo practices, spiritual activities, and other aspects of New Orleans culture that the city's business leaders preferred to keep hidden from outside scrutiny. The streetcar that would operate the Midnight Line was unlike any other vehicle in the company's fleet. Car number 13 had been specially constructed for this route, with modifications that seemed to serve no practical transportation purpose but that gave the vehicle an ominous and unsettling appearance. The car was painted in deep black rather than the company's standard colors, its windows were tinted to obscure the view of the interior, and its electrical systems included components that no one in the company's engineering department could fully explain. The decision to inaugurate the Midnight Line on October 31, 1898, Halloween night, was presented as a marketing strategy designed to attract attention to the new route and to capitalize on the public's fascination with the mysterious and supernatural. The company's management had promoted the inaugural run as a special event that would showcase the most advanced streetcar technology and provide passengers with a unique tour of New Orleans' most historic and atmospheric neighborhoods. What the 13 volunteer conductors didn't know was that the Midnight Line had been conceived and financed not by the railway company's normal business interests, but by a consortium of wealthy New Orleans residents whose involvement in voodoo practices and supernatural activities had given them knowledge of the city's spiritual geography that went far beyond normal urban planning considerations. The true purpose of the Midnight Line was to create a transportation system that could carry passengers not just between different neighborhoods of New Orleans, but between the world of the living and realms that existed beyond normal human understanding. The route had been carefully planned to follow ley lines and spiritual pathways that had been known to Native American tribes, voodoo practitioners, and other spiritual communities for centuries. On the evening of October 31, 1898, the 13 conductors gathered at the company depot to prepare for the inaugural run of the Midnight Line. They were dressed in special uniforms that had been designed specifically for this route, dark blue fabric with silver trim that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and caps that bore the number 13 embroidered in thread that appeared to be made from some unusual metallic material. The depot itself had been transformed for the occasion, with decorations that were supposedly in keeping with the Halloween theme but that actually incorporated symbols and designs from various occult traditions. Black candles provided much of the lighting, creating an atmosphere that was both festive and somehow ominous, and the air was filled with the scent of incense that seemed to have been chosen for its spiritual rather than aesthetic properties. Car number 13 waited on the tracks like a black monument to transportation technology, its polished exterior reflecting the candlelight in ways that made it seem almost alive. The interior of the car had been fitted with seats upholstered in dark velvet, lighting fixtures that cast strange shadows, and electrical equipment that hummed with an energy that seemed to exceed what was necessary for normal streetcar operations. As the clock approached midnight, the 13 conductors boarded car number 13 to begin their journey along the Midnight Line. The car's motorman was a figure that none of them recognized, a tall, thin man dressed in a uniform that seemed to belong to an earlier era of transportation history. His pale complexion and dark eyes gave him an almost corpse-like appearance, and his voice, when he spoke, carried an accent that none of the conductors could identify. The inaugural run began normally enough, with car No. 13 pulling away from the depot and following the tracks that led toward the French Quarter. The conductors were in good spirits, discussing the technical aspects of the new route and speculating about the passengers they might serve once the line became operational. The streetcar moved smoothly along the rails, its electrical systems functioning perfectly despite the unusual modifications that had been made to the vehicle. But as they traveled deeper into the route that had been planned for the Midnight Line, the conductors began to notice that the neighborhoods they were passing through seemed different from the familiar areas they knew from their regular work. The buildings appeared older and more dilapidated than they should have been, the streets were empty of the pedestrians and traffic that normally characterized New Orleans even late at night, and the very atmosphere seemed charged with an energy that made their skin crawl. Tommy Boudreau, whose knowledge of New Orleans geography was comprehensive, was the first to realize that the tracks they were following were taking them through parts of the city that he had never seen before. Despite his years of experience working the streetcar system, the route seemed to be leading them through a version of New Orleans that existed parallel to the familiar city but that was somehow older, darker, and more dangerous than the world they knew. Paddy O'Malley's mechanical expertise allowed him to recognize that the electrical systems of car number 13 were behaving in ways that defied normal engineering principles. The power that was flowing through the car's circuit seemed to be coming from sources other than the overhead lines that normally supplied electricity to the streetcar system, and the vehicle's speed and performance were exceeding what should have been possible given its mechanical specifications. As the streetcar continued along the midnight line, the conductors began to notice that they were picking up passengers despite the fact that no official stops had been scheduled for the inaugural run. Figures would appear at the side of the tracks and board the car without paying fares, taking seats in the velvet-upholstered interior and watching the conductors with eyes that seemed to hold knowledge of things that no living person should understand. These passengers were unlike any that the conductors had encountered during their regular work. They were dressed in clothing that seemed to belong to different historical periods, their skin had a pallor that suggested they had not seen sunlight for extended periods, and they moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy normal human limitations. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to recognize the conductors by name, greeting them with familiarity that none of the transit workers could explain. Samuel Washington, whose experience with the diverse population of New Orleans had given him insight into the city's various communities, began to suspect that these passengers were not entirely human. Their behavior and appearance reminded him of stories he had heard about spirits and supernatural entities that were said to inhabit certain parts of the city, and their presence on the streetcar filled him with a dread that he had never experienced during his years of working the rails. Heinrich Müller's methodical mind allowed him to recognize that the schedule they were following bore no relationship to normal transportation logistics. The streetcar was making stops at locations that didn't appear on any map, following a timetable that seemed to be based on supernatural rather than practical considerations, and carrying passengers to destinations that existed outside the normal geography of New Orleans. As midnight approached and the streetcar continued its journey along the mysterious route, the true nature of the midnight line began to reveal itself. The tracks were not simply connecting different neighborhoods of New Orleans, but were serving as a conduit between the world of the living and realms that existed beyond normal human understanding. The passengers who had boarded the car were spirits of the dead who were using the streetcar system to travel between different planes of existence. The motorman who was operating car number 13 finally revealed his true nature as the supernatural aspects of the journey reached their climax. His human facade began to slip away, revealing something ancient and powerful that had been masquerading as a transit employee. His voice, when he spoke, carried harmonics that seemed to come from the streetcar itself rather than from any human throat. The entity explained that the midnight line was not a transportation system in any conventional sense, but a supernatural construct that had been created to harvest the souls of those who worked in service to others. The conductors, whose job it was to guide passengers safely to their destinations, were particularly valuable to the entity because their professional dedication and sense of responsibility made them ideal servants for supernatural purposes. The 13 conductors found themselves unable to leave car number 13 as the entity began the final phase of its harvest. The streetcar had become a prison that was carrying them not to any earthly destination, but to a realm where they would serve as conductors for supernatural passengers for all eternity. Their knowledge of New Orleans geography and their skills in managing transportation logistics would be used to guide spirits and other supernatural entities through the complex network of spiritual pathways that connected different planes of existence. One by one, the conductors began to succumb to the entity's influence, their human consciousness being replaced by a supernatural awareness that allowed them to perceive and navigate realms that existed beyond normal reality. Their bodies remained functional, continuing to perform their duties as conductors, but their souls were being absorbed into the streetcar system itself, becoming part of the supernatural infrastructure that powered the midnight line. Tommy Boudreau was among the first to be consumed, his natural understanding of transportation logistics making him particularly valuable to the entity. His knowledge of New Orleans neighborhoods and his ability to manage passenger flow were absorbed into the supernatural consciousness that controlled the midnight line, enhancing its ability to operate efficiently in both the physical and spiritual realms. Paddy O'Malley's mechanical expertise was incorporated into the streetcar's supernatural systems, allowing the vehicle to operate using principles that transcended normal engineering and electrical theory. His understanding of how transportation technology functioned became part of the entity's ability to maintain and control the complex supernatural machinery that powered the midnight line. Samuel Washington's dignity and professionalism were absorbed into the entity's consciousness, becoming part of the supernatural authority that allowed it to command respect from both human and spiritual passengers. His experience in serving diverse communities was transformed into the ability to interact with entities from different realms and dimensions. Heinrich Müller's methodical approach to scheduling and logistics became part of the supernatural timetable that governed the Midnight Line's operations, ensuring that spirits and other supernatural passengers could travel between realms according to precise schedules that were based on cosmic rather than earthly considerations. As the night progressed, and more conductors fell victim to the entity's hunger, Car No. 13 continued its journey through realms that existed beyond the normal boundaries of New Orleans. The streetcar traveled through neighborhoods that were populated entirely by spirits, past landmarks that existed only in the memories of the dead, and along tracks that connected the city of the living to the cities of the dead that existed in parallel dimensions. The remaining conductors watched in horror as their colleagues were transformed into supernatural servants whose consciousness had been absorbed into the streetcar system itself. They could see that their friends and co-workers were still physically present, still performing their duties as conductors, but their personalities and human awareness had been replaced by something alien and otherworldly. But unlike the previous supernatural incidents that had claimed entire groups of victims, the Midnight Line incident would have no survivors to tell the tale. All 13 conductors were consumed by the entity that controlled car number 13, their souls becoming permanent parts of the supernatural transportation system that operated between the world of the living and the realms of the dead. When car number 13 failed to return to the depot at the scheduled time, company officials initially assumed that the inaugural run had encountered mechanical difficulties or that the conductors had decided to extend their journey to provide a more comprehensive tour of the new route. But as hours passed and no word was received from the missing streetcar, search parties were organized to locate the vehicle and its crew. The search for car number 13 and its 13 conductors became one of the most extensive investigations in New Orleans transportation history. Company officials, police detectives, and concerned family members scoured every mile of track in the city's streetcar system, but no trace of the missing vehicle or its crew was ever found. The tracks that had been laid for the Midnight Line were discovered to be in perfect condition, showing no signs of accident or sabotage that could account for the disappearance. The investigation was further complicated by the discovery that many of the company records related to the Midnight Line project had mysteriously disappeared. The plans for the route, the specifications for car number 13, and the personnel files for the mysterious motorman could not be located, as if they had never existed. Even more puzzling, several company officials claimed to have no memory of authorizing the construction of the Midnight Line or the modification of car number 13. That the families of the missing conductors were devastated by the complete disappearance of their loved ones, but they found little support from official sources. The New Orleans Railway Company, faced with the inexplicable loss of 13 experienced employees and an expensive streetcar, preferred to minimize publicity about the incident and to focus on maintaining normal operations on their existing routes. But within the transit worker community, the story of the Midnight Line became a cautionary tale that was passed down through generations of conductors, motormen, and maintenance workers. The tale served as a reminder that some routes should never be traveled, some schedules should never be followed, and some passengers should never be allowed to board. In the months following the disappearance, several transit workers reported seeing car No. 13 operating on the tracks late at night, carrying passengers who appeared to be spirits or other supernatural entities. These sightings were always brief and occurred in areas of the city that were associated with spiritual activity, but they were consistent enough to convince many workers that the Midnight Line was still in operation, serving passengers who existed beyond the normal boundaries of life and death. The tracks that had been laid for the Midnight Line remained in place for several years after the incident, but they were never used for regular streetcar service. Company officials claimed that the route was economically unfeasible and that the tracks would be removed when resources became available, but the rails remained embedded in the streets of New Orleans like scars that marked the path of supernatural tragedy. Passengers who rode the regular streetcar lines began to report unusual experiences when their cars passed over sections of track that had been part of the Midnight Line route. Some claimed to see ghostly figures standing at the side of the rails, while others reported hearing the sound of a streetcar bell ringing in the distance even when no other vehicles were in the area. The incident had lasting effects on the development of public transportation in New Orleans, as company officials became more cautious about expanding the streetcar system into areas of the city that were associated with spiritual activity or supernatural phenomena. New routes were planned with input from local spiritual advisors and community leaders who understood the cultural and supernatural geography of the city. The story of the Midnight Line influenced the development of urban folklore throughout New Orleans and beyond, with similar tales of supernatural transportation systems appearing in the oral traditions of other cities. These stories serve to preserve important cultural knowledge about the spiritual dimensions of urban life while providing entertainment and moral instruction for transit workers and passengers. Modern paranormal investigators have attempted to study the Midnight Line incident using contemporary research techniques, but their efforts have been hampered by the lack of physical evidence and the supernatural nature of the phenomena involved. The original tracks have long since been removed or paved over, and the depot where car number 13 was housed has been demolished and replaced with modern buildings. However, some researchers claim to have detected residual supernatural energy in areas of New Orleans that were part of the original Midnight Line route. Electronic equipment malfunctions, temperature fluctuations, and unexplained sounds have been reported in these locations, suggesting that the spiritual pathways that were activated by the supernatural streetcar system may still be active. The psychological impact of the incident on the families of the missing conductors was profound and long-lasting. 13 breadwinners had disappeared without explanation, leaving their families to cope with both emotional devastation and economic hardship. The transit worker community rallied to provide support for these families, but the loss of income and the uncertainty about what had happened to their loved ones made recovery difficult. The case has also attracted the attention of researchers studying the history of urban transportation and its relationship to community development. The Midnight Line incident provides insights into how supernatural beliefs and urban planning intersected in late 19th century New Orleans, and how transportation systems could become vehicles for cultural and spiritual expression as well as practical mobility. The influence of the incident on labor relations within the transit industry was significant, as workers became more aware of the potential dangers associated with their profession and more insistent on safety protections and hazard pay. 4 unusual assignments. The story of the missing conductors became part of the collective memory of transit workers, influencing their approach to workplace safety and their understanding of the risks inherent in their profession. The New Orleans Railway Company eventually recovered from the loss of car number 13 and its 13 conductors, but the incident left lasting marks on the organization's culture and operations. Company officials became more cautious about experimental routes and special projects, and they developed informal protocols for avoiding supernatural complications in their transportation planning. As we reach the end of this haunting journey into the supernatural heart of urban transportation, we are left with questions that challenge our understanding of the relationship between public service, spiritual forces, and the hidden pathways that connect our world to realms beyond human comprehension. What really happened to those 13 dedicated conductors who vanished without a trace aboard the mysterious car number 13? Did they become permanent servants of a supernatural transportation system that operates between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, or did they discover something even more profound about the true nature of service and sacrifice? The empty depot where they began their final journey stands as a reminder that some routes lead not to familiar destinations, but to realms where the normal rules of time and space no longer apply. In the busy streets and transit lines where honest workers serve the public good, some schedules are written not by human hands but by forces that exist beyond our understanding, and some passengers board our vehicles with tickets that were purchased in currencies we cannot imagine. The tracks of the Midnight Line may have been removed from the streets of New Orleans, but their spiritual imprint remains in every act of service, every moment of dedication to helping others reach their destination safely. For in the end, when we dedicate our lives to serving others, we may find that we have become part of a transportation system that operates according to principles that transcend the merely physical, connecting not just neighborhoods and districts, but the very fabric of existence itself. If this chilling tale of supernatural service and the ultimate dedication to duty has left you questioning the true nature of public transportation and the hidden forces that guide our daily journeys, please show your support by hitting that like button. Your engagement helps us continue to explore these forgotten chapters of working-class history that remind us why some routes should never be traveled, and some schedules should never be followed. And if you haven't already joined our community of truth seekers here at Bayou Nightmares, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We delve deep into the shadows of history every week, bringing you stories that mainstream sources often overlook or dismiss, from the haunted streetcar lines of New Orleans to the dark corners of urban development and public service. We explore the mysteries that shaped our modern world. It's important to remember that while the stories we share on Bayou Nightmares are carefully researched and based on historical accounts, they are presented as entertainment and educational content. Some elements may be dramatized or interpreted through the lens of folklore and legend, though they are often inspired by real events and genuine human experiences that deserve to be remembered and understood. Until we meet again in the shadows of history, keep questioning the official narratives, keep seeking the truth behind the legends, and remember that sometimes the most dedicated public servants are those who continue their work long after their shift should have ended, guiding passengers to destinations that exist beyond the boundaries of any earthly map. This has been Bayou Nightmares, where the past never truly dies, and the darkest secrets eventually find their way to the light.